changes. The Industrial Revolution first emerged in the English Midlands. Its most potent symbol was a new kind of architecture, the factory.
This cotton mill was the world's very first fully fledged modern factory. It was built in the 1770s by the entrepreneur Richard Arkwright and designed around his greatest invention, the water frame. A machine that used the power of flowing water to drive looms that produced cotton yarn cheaper and faster than anybody ever had. And that makes this mill the birthplace of mass production, a critical step forward in the harnessing of the power of nature.
Arkwright commissioned a painting of his cotton mill by the artist Joseph Wright of Derby. Wright saw in the cotton mill solid evidence of Enlightenment ideas, which were that science, reason, and freedom of thought should prevail over older ideas of dogma, superstition, and blind faith.
What really fascinated Wright of Derby was not all the machinery and the hard labor of the Industrial Revolution, but the ideas that drove it. And these were the great ideas of the Enlightenment, of faith in reason and in scientific method, an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, and an unshakable belief in progress.
In Wright's most famous painting, a traveling scientist has placed a bird in a glass bell jar and begun to pump out the air. Deprived of oxygen, the bird begins to suffocate. The onlookers respond with a mixture of fascination and horror. This is science as the new religion, with the power over life itself. But Wright also hints at the great fear of the age, that science, the machine, and progress all come at a great cost. As the 18th century drew to a close, one momentous event would mark the start of a new, zealous export of Enlightenment ideas to other cultures. In the summer of 1798, the army of the French Empire, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, invaded Egypt.
Many Europeans regarded Egypt as the birthplace of civilization. They believed that ideas that had first been nurtured here under the pharaohs had been passed down through ancient Greece, through the Roman Empire, through the Renaissance, all the way down to modern Enlightenment France. So by invading Egypt, Napoleon was leading France back to the source of civilization.
Napoleon was a very ambitious young man, and he seemed to be, even in 1798, very keen on creating his own myth. The lure of the East, even for the Greeks and Romans, had been a source of mystical knowledge and power. And so when Napoleon decided to go east, he wasn't just going with an army, but he was going to go with a huge number of learned people to observe and to take notes, to acquire some of this different kind of knowledge.
Napoleon's scholars set about studying every aspect of the country they had conquered, especially the ancient ruins that lay half buried beneath the sand. They would publish their findings in a monumental multi-volume work, The Description of Egypt.
These books are fabulous. They're huge volumes of plates. It made available ancient Egypt, monuments, decorative styles, contemporary Egypt, everything to the general public. And it had a great impact on art as well, and clothing and design. So this is when you start seeing Egyptomania in Europe really coming into the fore. And this slowly impacted the rest of the world. You see it in North America as well, where you have Egyptianizing elements, whether it is in just pure decoration or in the lines or batters of walls or little bits of cornicing. And we can again lay this to some extent at Napoleon's tour.
But Napoleon's invasion was about more than uncovering the secrets of ancient Egypt. It was also the most significant European foray into the Islamic world since the Crusades.
One of the things that we should bear in mind when we think about civilization as a concept is that when Europeans were using that concept in the 19th century, they were themselves, of course, drawing on an idea of civilization that they had formed in relation to the classical era. And they had an understanding of civilization as something that stood in contrast with barbarism. It might be non-Christian, it might be non-white, it might be the treatment of women, or things people ate, or the different kinds of clothes that they wore. It could take many, many forms, but it was always in opposition to civilization. And that gave Europeans, I think, a real sense of smugness, that the arrival of Europeans in different parts of the world was progress.
For European artists, Islamic culture became a source of exotic, often sexual fantasies, a canvas on which to project ideas long repressed in European thought and polite society.
This is the painting that inspired an entire genre of 19th century European art, Orientalism. It's the work of the French artist Eugène Delacroix, who painted it in the 1830s after he'd actually gone on a visit to Algeria. And this is the first real serious attempt to portray ordinary life in the Islamic world. But like many of the Orientalist paintings that would follow, not everything about it is what it seems. The title is Women of Algiers in Their Apartment, and Delacroix claims to have based the composition on a visit he'd made to an Arab household. But it would have been extremely unusual for a male stranger to be given access to the women of an Arab house. So there's every chance that these women were in fact Jewish. And there's other elements of this painting which were either embroidered or fabricated by Delacroix. The painting was completed in Paris using exotic costumes, and the models are Parisian models. And this figure of the black servant, or perhaps black slave, was of Delacroix's invention.
So what seems like a real scene is in fact a Parisian reverie of a supposed exotic, sensuous world that doesn't exist in Europe. Many Orientalists invented scenes that reveled in the decadence and despotism which Europeans considered to be Oriental qualities. Concubines languishing in hidden harems. Naked female slaves for sale in busy marketplaces. Orientalist themes became so popular that Ingres, master of the classical nude, set one of his last masterpieces in an imagined women's bathhouse, even though he'd never been to the Middle East. These were European fantasies, and they suggest a desire to escape the turmoil and anomie of life in dark industrial Europe. It was in search of wide open spaces and a new life of opportunity that Thomas Cole emigrated from Lancashire, England in 1818. But settling in New York, he found the city crowded and unpleasant, and in 1825 he set off on a trip to the Catskill Mountains to capture on canvas the unspoiled landscape of his adopted homeland.
Thomas Cole saw New York City as a manifestation of, what was wrong with the country. He had misgivings about the constant flux, the constant noise, the constant insult of city life. More than once expressed the sentiment, boy, I can't wait to get out of town and up to Catskill.
Thomas Cole regarded the American landscape as being what he himself called the undefiled work of gods. In this young country that just didn't have what Europeans recognized as a history, mountains and canyons and waterfalls were to replace the classical ruins so beloved of European landscape artists. In America, natural history was to stand in for history itself.
Cole had the pictorial language to paint America wild, because it's more than just seeing what's there, it's also putting it together so that it really, betokens wilderness. Some of the, rock formations and the blasted tree trunks in the foreground, these were contrivances, but the important thing was that to his audience, that was wild America.
Underpinning Cole's work was the experience of seeing firsthand the ruins of the Roman Empire, which made him think that the American wilderness would also be destroyed in the process of creating a new nation. And in 1830, Cole was given the opportunity to express his fears. A generous benefactor offered him several $1,000s, tens of thousands in today's money, to paint his chosen subject, the rise and fall of empire.
The Courts of Empire would never have happened without two conditions. One is that he saw the Roman ruins in Rome. So, he's primed when he comes back, and then he finds a patron who asked him to do whatever he wanted, essentially. And Cole had big ideas. The 5 pictures were made to be hung over a mantelpiece. The primitive state showing the prehistoric empire, the pastoral showing the archaic, sort of pre-Golden Age Greece kind of setting. The middle picture, and the largest, being the consummation, the zenith of empire, with its big alabaster classical buildings and its gilded statuary and rich hangings. The destruction of empire on the other side, which shows the empire being invaded from without. And finally, the nocturnal scene, the desolation, which in a way brought the viewer to the ruins that he himself had seen, and inspired this meditation of his own. It was remarkably well received, considering in a way how arcane it was for an American audience. But it's also true to say that critics, even as they admired the painting, they're saying, well, this is how it has been. It doesn't apply here. We're a democracy. Things will be different here.
But Cole's belief in the cyclical nature of history was viewed as nothing more than nostalgia by 19th century white America,